Hi boys and girls, it's Wednesday the 25th and today we are going to be reading chapters 2, 3, and 4 from The Thief of Always, okay? Our question of the day that I want you to stop and jot before we begin is this. I'm gonna hold it up. It's also in Canvas. So it says, what does Mrs. Griffin mean when she says the beetle and the worm find their way into everything? So you're gonna listen to that as we're reading today, okay? I'm gonna give you some tips at the end on how to piece through that a little bit, okay? So today, I'm gonna teach you that things sometimes are complicated in our fantasy novels, right? And sometimes the characters begin without a lot of knowledge. Think about Harry Potter, right? He didn't know a lot about magic in the beginning. Or think about Lucy in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. She didn't know anything even about Narnia, right? So she just learned along the way, right, with the people that were in Narnia. So as readers, when the main character is told important information or has dramatic new experiences, you see those moments as opportunities for you to learn hand in hand with the main character. I think that's such a cool point to take notice of, because you guys know as we go, reading does get a little bit more complicated, but you guys have the skills that you need to really tune in to what is going on with that character and how you can sort of piece together more important information about the book, right? This is so cool. All right, so we're just gonna jump right into our reading. I hope you guys are finding everything okay in Canvas, and a lot of you have subscribed to the YouTube channel, so thank you for that. Keep on keeping on. You're just gonna watch a YouTube video every day. You're gonna respond to that in our Canvas quiz, and you're gonna fill in your reading log on Canvas, okay? If you would rather me email you just like a hard copy that you can print out for the reading log, I'm okay with that too. You can just take a picture of that and send it in to me once a week, okay? Just send it to my email. I'm still at apolka@conroeisd.net, so just feel free to shoot me an email whenever you have questions, okay? Last night we had a Zoom that involved some parents. So, and today we're gonna have a Zoom from a conference. I'm pretty sure it'll still be Zoom from 10 to 11. So be sure that you're tuning in at that time. If you have some questions, I'm available for answering, okay? So I hope you guys are doing well, and we're gonna start our read aloud. I forgot, here we go. 2, The Hidden Way. This is our picture for beginning chapter 2, okay? The Hidden Way. Harvey said nothing about his particular visitor to either his mom or his dad in case they put locks on the windows to stop Rictus returning to the house. But the trouble with keeping the visit a secret was that after a few days, Harvey began to wonder if he'd imagined the whole thing. Perhaps he'd fallen asleep at the window, he thought, and Rictus had simply been a dream. He kept hoping, nevertheless. Watch for me, Rictus had said, and Harvey did just that. He watched from the window of his room. He watched from his desk at school. He even watched with one eye when he was lying on his pillow at night. But Rictus didn't show. And then, about a week after that first visit, just as Harvey's hope was waning, his watchfulness was rewarded. On his way to school one foggy morning, he heard a voice above his head and looked up to see Rictus floating down from the clouds. His coat swelled up around him so that he looked fatter than a prize pig. "How you doing?" he said as he descended. "I was starting to think I'd invented you," Harvey replied. "You know, like a dream." "I get that a lot," Rictus said, his smile wider than ever, particularly from the ladies. "You're a dream come true, they say," he winked. "And who am I to argue?" "You like my shoes?" Harvey looked down at Rictus's bright blue shoes. They were quite a sight, and he said so. I've given them, it's written kind of weird, I'm sorry. I got them given, you guys, I got given them by my boss. We know that's not the proper way to speak, but they write it sometimes in books like that. Rictus said, he's very happy you're going to come visit. So, are you ready? Well, it's no use wasting time, Rictus said. There may not be room for you tomorrow. Can I just ask one question? I thought we agreed. I know, but just one. All right, one. Is this place far from here? Nah, it's just across town. So I'd only be missing a couple of hours of school? That's 2 questions, Rictus said. No, I'm just thinking out loud. Rictus grunted. Look, he said, I'm not here to do a great song and dance persuading you. I got a friend called Jive that does that. I'm just a smiler. I smile and I say, come with me to the holiday house. And if folks don't want to come, he shrugged, hey, it's their hard luck. With that, he turned his back on Harvey. Wait, Harvey protested. I want to come, but just for a little while. You can stay as long as you like, Rictus said, or as little. All I want to do is take that glum expression off your face and put one of these up there. His grin grew even larger. Is there any crime in that? No, said Harvey. There's no crime. I'm just glad that you found me. I really am. So what if he missed all of the morning at school, he thought. It'd be no great loss. Maybe an hour or 2 in the afternoon as well, as long as he was back home by 3 or 4, certainly before dark. I'm ready to go, he said to Rictus. Lead the way. Millsap, the town in which Harvey had lived all his life, wasn't very big, and he thought he'd seen about all of it over the years. But the streets he knew were soon behind them. And though Rictus was setting a fair speed, Harvey made sure he kept a mental list of landmarks along the way, in case he had to find his way home on his own. A butcher's shop with 2 pigs' heads hanging from hooks, a church with a yard full of old tombs beside it, a statue of some dead general covered from hat to stirrup in pigeon dung. All these sights and more he noted and filed away. And while they walked, Rictus kept up a stream of idle chatter. I hate the fog, just hate it, he said. And there'll be rain by noon. We'll be out of it, of course. He went on from talk of rain to the talk of streets. Look at all this trash all over the sidewalk. It's shameful. And the mud, it's making a fine old mess of my shoes. He had plenty more to say, but none of it was very enlightening. So after a while, Harvey gave up listening. How far was this holiday house, he began to wonder. The fog was chilling him and his legs were aching. If they didn't get there soon, he was going to turn back. I know what you're thinking, said Rictus. I bet you don't. You're thinking all this is a trick. You're thinking Rictus is leading you on a mystery tour and there's nothing at the end of it. Isn't that true? Maybe a little. Well, my boy, I've got news for you. Look up ahead. He pointed, and there, not very far from where they stood, was a high wall which was so long that it disappeared into the fog to the right and left. What do you see? Rictus asked him. A wall, Harvey replied, though the more he stared at it, the less certain he was of this. The stones, which had seemed solid enough at first sight, now looked to be shifting and wavering as though they'd been chiseled from the fog itself and piled up here to keep out prying eyes. It looks like a wall, Harvey said, but it's not a wall. You're very observant, Rictus replied admiringly. Most people just see a dead end, so they turn around and take another street. But not us. We're going to keep on walking. You know why? Because the holiday house is on the other side. What a miraculous kid you are, Rictus replied. That's exactly right. Are you hungry, by the way? Look at the art on these 2 pages right here. This is what they're talking about. Okay? Starving. Well, there's a woman waiting for you in the house called Mrs. Griffin. And let me tell you, she is the greatest cook in all of America land. I swear on my tailor's grave. Anything you can dream of eating, she can cook. All you have to do is ask. Her deviled eggs, he smacked his lips, perfection. I don't see a gate, Harvey said. That's because there isn't one. So how do we get in? Just keep walking. Half out of hunger, half out of curiosity, Harvey did as Rictus had instructed, and as he came within 3 steps of the wall, a gust of balmy, flower-scented wind slipped between the shimmering stones and kissed his cheek. Its warmth was welcome after his long, cold trek, and he picked up his pace, reaching out to touch the wall as he approached it. The misty stones seemed to reach for him in their turn, wrapping their soft gray arms around his shoulders and ushering him throughout the wall. He looked back, but the street he'd stepped out of, with its gray sidewalks and gray clouds, had already disappeared. Beneath his feet, the grass was high and full of flowers. Above his head, the sky was midsummer blue, and ahead of him, set the summit of a great slope, was a house that had surely been first imagined in a dream. He didn't wait to see if Rictus was coming after him, nor to wonder how the gray beast February had been slain and this warm day risen in its place. He simply let out a laugh that Rictus would have been proud of and hurried up the slope into the shadow of the dream house. That was chapter 2. This is chapter 3. Look at the art, you guys. What? It's called Pleasure and the Worm. Pay attention very carefully right here. This is where our question comes from for today. What a fine thing it would be, Harvey thought, to build a place like this, to drive its foundations deep into the earth, to lay its floors and hoist its walls, to say, where there was nothing, I raised a house. That would be a very fine thing. It wasn't a puffed up peacock of a place either. There were no marble steps, no fluted columns. It was a proud house, certainly, but there was nothing wrong with that. It had much to be proud of. It stood 4 stories high and boasted more windows than Harvey could readily count. Its porch was wide, as were the steps that led up to its carved front door. Its slated roofs were steep and crowned with magnificent chimneys and lightning rods. Its highest point, however, was neither a chimney nor a lightning rod, but a large and elaborately wrought weather vane, which Harvey was peering up at when he heard the front door open and a voice say, "Harvey Swick, as I live and breathe." He looked down, the weather vane's white silhouette still behind his eyes, and there on the porch stood a woman who made his grandmother, the oldest person he knew, look young. She had a face like a rolled up ball of cobwebs from which her hair, which could have also been spider's work, fell in wispy abundance. Her eyes were tiny, her mouth was tight, and her hands gnarled. Her voice, however, was melodious, and its words welcoming. "I thought maybe you'd decided not to come," she said, picking up a basket of freshly cut flowers she'd left on the step. "Which would have been a pity. Come on in. There's food on the table. You must be famished." "I can't stay long," Harvey said. "You must do whatever you wish," came the reply. "I'm Mrs. Griffin, by the way." "Yes, Rictus mentioned you." "I hope he didn't bend your ear too much." He loves the sound of his own voice. That and his reflection. Harvey had climbed the porch steps by now and stopped in front of the door. This was a moment of decision, he knew, though, and he wasn't quite certain why. "Step inside," Mrs. Griffin said, brushing a spider hair back from her furrowed brow. But Harvey still hesitated, and he might have turned around and never stepped inside the house, except that he heard a boy's voice yelling, "I got ya, I got ya," followed by an uproarious laughter. "Wendell," Mrs. Griffin said, "are you chasing the cats again?" The sound of laughter grew even louder, and it was so full of good humor that Harvey stepped over the threshold and into the house just so that he could see the face of its owner. He only got a brief look. A goofy, bespectacled face appeared for a moment at the other end of the hallway. Then a piebald cat dashed between the boy's legs, and he was off after it, yelling and laughing again. "He's such a crazy boy," Mrs. Griffin said, "but all the cats love him." The house was more wonderful inside than out. Even on the short journey to the kitchen, Harvey glimpsed enough to know that this was a place built for games, chases, and adventures. It was a maze in which no 2 doors were alike. It was a treasure house where some notorious pirate had hidden its blood-stained booty. It was a resting place for carpets flown by Dinge and boxes sealed before the flood, where the eggs of beasts and that the earth had lost were wrapped and waiting for the sun's heat to hatch them. "It's perfect," Harvey muttered to himself. Mrs. Griffin caught his words. "Nothing's perfect," she replied. "Why not?" "Because time passes," she went on, staring down at the flowers she'd cut. "And the beetle and the worm find their way into everything sooner or later." I hope that you're stopping and jotting right now. You can even click pause because this is a YouTube video. Why not? Okay. Where was I? Oh yes, and the beetle and the worm find their way into everything sooner or later. Hearing this, Harvey wondered what grief it was Mrs. Griffin had known or seen to make her so mournful. "I'm sorry," she said, covering her melancholy with a tiny smile. "You didn't come here to listen to my dirges? Dirges. D-I-R-G-E-S. You came to enjoy yourself, didn't you?" "I guess I did," Harvey said. "So let me tempt you with some treats." Harvey sat himself down at the kitchen table, and within 60 seconds, Mrs. Griffin had set a dozen plates of food in front of him. Hamburgers, hot dogs, and fried chicken, mounds of buttered potatoes, apple, cherry, and mud pies, ice cream and whipped cream, grapes, tangerines, and a plate of fruits he couldn't even name. He set to eating with gusto and was devouring his second slice of pie when a freckled girl with long frizzy blonde hair and a huge green blue eyes ambled in. "You must be Harvey," she said. "How did you know?" "Wendell told me." "How did he know?" She shrugged. "He just heard. I'm Lulu, by the way." "Did you just arrive?" "No, I've been here for ages. Longer than Wendell, but not as long as Mrs. Griffin. Nobody's been here as long as she has. Isn't that right?" "Almost," said Mrs. Griffin, a little mysteriously. "Do you want something to eat, sweetie?" Lulu shook her head. "No thanks, I haven't got much of an appetite at the moment." She nevertheless sat down opposite Harvey, stuck her thumb in the mud pie, and licked it clean. "Who invited you here?" she asked. "A guy called Rictus." "Oh yeah, the one with the grin?" "That's him. He's got a sister and 2 brothers," she went on. "You've met them then?" "Not all of them," Lulu admitted. "They keep to themselves, mostly, but you'll meet 1 or 2 of them sooner or later." "I don't think I'll be staying," Harvey said. "I mean, my mom and dad don't even know I'm here." "Sure they do," Lulu replied. "They just didn't tell you about it." This confused Harvey, and he said so. "Call your mom and dad," Lulu suggested. "Ask them." "Can I do that?" he wondered. "Of course you can," Mrs. Griffin replied. "The phone's in the hallway." Carrying a spoonful of ice cream with him, Harvey went to the phone and dialed. At first, there was a whining sound on the phone, as though a wind were in the wires. Then, as it cleared, he heard his mom say, "Who is this?" "Before you start yelling," he began. "Oh, honey," his mom cooed. "Did you arrive?" "You are at the holiday house, I hope." "Yes, I am, but..." "Oh, good, I was worried. Maybe you'd lost your way. Do you like it there?" "You knew I was coming?" Harvey said, catching Lulu's eye. "I told you," she mouthed. "Of course we knew," his mom went on. "We invited Mr. Rictus to show you the place. You looked so sad, you poor lamb. We thought you needed a little fun." "Really?" said Harvey, astonished by this turn of events. "We just want you to enjoy yourself," his mom went on. "So you stay just as long as you want." "What about school?" he said. "You deserve a little time off," came the reply. "Don't you worry about anything. Just have a good time." "I will, Mom." "Bye, honey." "Bye." Harvey came away from the conversation shaking his head in amazement. "You were right," he said to Lulu. "They arranged everything. So now you don't have to feel guilty," said Lulu. "Well, I guess I'll see you around later, huh?" And with that, she ambled away. If you're finished eating, Mrs. Griffin said, I'll show you to your room. I'd like that. She duly led Harvey up the stairs. At the landing, basking on the sun-drenched windowsill, was a cat with the fur the color of a cloudless sky. That's Blue Cat, Mrs. Griffin said. You saw Stew Cat playing with Wendell. I don't know where Clue Cat is, but he'll find you. He likes new guests. Do you have a lot of people coming here? Only children. Very special children like you and Lulu and Wendell. Mr. Hood won't just have anybody. Who's Mr. Hood? The man who built the holiday house, Mrs. Griffin replied. Will I meet him too? Mrs. Griffin looked discomforted by the question. Maybe, she said, her gaze averted, but he's a very private man. They were up on the landing by now, and Mrs. Griffin led Harvey past a row of painted portraits to a room at the back of the house. Look at the picture on this next page. Cool, huh? Seems like it goes on forever and ever, and it almost reminds me of the wardrobe in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Anyway, it overlooked an orchard, and the warm air carried the smell of ripe apples into the room. You look tired, my sweet, Mrs. Griffin said. Maybe you should lie down for a little while. Harvey usually hated to sleep in the afternoon. It reminded him too much of having the flu or the measles. But the pillow looked very cool and comfortable. And when Mrs. Griffin had taken her leave, he decided to lie down just for a few minutes. Either he was more tired than he'd thought, or the calm and comfort of the house rocked him into a slumber. Whichever, his eyes closed almost as soon as he put his head on the pillow, and they did not open again until morning. So we're going to be now on starting chapter 4. It's called A Death Between Seasons. Okay, A Death Between Seasons. Look at the font on that, by the way. The font even is a little bit creepy, right? Okay, here we go. Last chapter for the day. I hope you're still engaged. The sun came to wake him soon after dawn, a straight white dart of light laid on his lids. He sat up with a start, wondering for a moment what bed this was, what room, what house. Then his memories of the previous day returned, and he realized that he'd slept through from late afternoon to early morning. The rest had strengthened him. He felt energetic, and with a whoop of pleasure, he jumped out of bed and got dressed. The house was more welcoming than ever today. The flowers Mrs. Griffin had set on every table and sill singing with color. The front door stood open, and sliding down the gleaming banisters, Harvey raced out onto the porch to inspect the morning. A surprise awaited him. The trees, which had been heavy with leaves the previous afternoon, had shed their canopies. There were new tiny buds on every branch and twig, as though this were the first day of spring. Another day, another dollar, said Wendell, ambling around the corner of the house. What does that mean? Said Harvey. It's what my father used to say all the time. Another day, another dollar. He's a banker, my dad, Wendell Hamilton II, and me, I'm Wendell Hamilton III. How'd you know? Lucky guess. I'm Harvey. Yeah, I know. Do you like tree houses? I never had one. Wendell pointed up at the tallest tree. There was a platform perched up among the branches with rudimentary house built upon it. I've been working up there for weeks, said Wendell, but I can't get it finished alone. You want to help me? Sure, but I've got to eat something first. Go eat. I'll be around. Harvey headed back inside and found Mrs. Griffin setting out a breakfast fit for a prince. There was milk spilt on the floor and a cat with a tail hooked like a question mark, lapping it up. Clue Cat, he said fondly. He's the wicked one. Clue Cat looked up as if he knew he was being talked about. Then he jumped up onto the table and searched among the plates of pancakes and waffles for something more to eat. Can he do whatever he likes? Harvey said, watching the cat sniff at this and that. I mean, does nobody control him? Ah, well, we all have somebody watching over us, don't we? Mrs. Griffin replied, whether we like it or not. Now eat. You've got some wonderful times ahead of you. Harvey didn't need a second invitation. He dug into his second meal at the holiday house with even more appetite than he had the first, and then he headed out to meet the day. Oh, what a day it was. The breeze was warm and smelled of the green scent of growing things. The perfect sky was full of swooping birds. He sauntered through the grass, his hands in his pockets like the Lord of all he surveyed, calling to Wendell as he approached the trees. "Can I come up?" "If you've got a head for heights," Wendell dared him. The ladder creaked as he climbed, but he made the platform without missing a step. Wendell was impressed. "Not bad for a new boy," he said. "We have 2 kids here, couldn't even get up halfway." "Where'd they go?" "Back home, I suppose. Kids come and go, you know." Harvey peered out through the branches upon which every bud was bursting. "You can't see much, can you?" he said. "I mean, there's no sign of the town at all." "Who cares?" said Wendell. "It's just gray out there anyway." "And it's sunny here," Harvey said, staring down at the wall of misty stones that divided the grounds of the house from the outside world. "How's that possible?" Wendell's answer was the same again. "Who cares?" he said. "I know I don't. Now, are we going to start building or what?" They spent the next 2 hours working on the treehouse, descending a dozen times to dig through the timbers heaped beside the orchard, looking for boards to finish their repairs. By noon, they'd not only found enough wood to fix the roof, but they had each found a friend. Harvey liked Wendell's bad jokes, and "who cares?" which found its way into every other sentence, and Wendell seemed to be just as happy to have Harvey's company. "You're the first kid who's been real fun," he said. "What about Lulu?" "What about her? Isn't she any fun?" "She was okay when I first arrived," Wendell admitted. "I mean, she's been here months, so she kind of showed me the place. But she's gotten weird the last few days. I see her sometimes wandering around like she's sleepwalking, with a blank expression on her face." "She's probably going crazy," Harvey said. "Her brain's turning to mush." "How do you know about that stuff?" Wendell wanted to know, his face lighting up with ghoulish delight. "Sure I do," Harvey lied. "My dad's a surgeon." Wendell was most impressed by this, and for the next few minutes listened in gaping envy as Harvey told him about all the operations he'd seen. Skulls sewn open and legs sawn off, feet sewn on where hands used to be, and a man with a boil on his behind that grew into a talking head. "Ew. You swear?" said Wendell. "I swear," said Harvey. "That's so cool." All this talk brought on a fierce hunger, and at Wendell's suggestion, they climbed down the ladder and wandered into the house to eat. "What do you want to do this afternoon?" he asked Harvey as they sat down at the table. "It's going to be real hot." "It always is." "Is there anywhere we can swim?" Wendell frowned. "Well, yes," he said doubtfully. "There's a lake around the other side of the house, but you won't much like it." "Why not?" "The water's so deep you can't even see the bottom." "Are there any fish?" "Oh, sure. Maybe we could catch some. Mrs. Griffin could cook them for us." At this, Mrs. Griffin, who was at the stove piling up a plate with onion rings, gave a little shout and dropped the plate. She turned to Harvey, her face ashen. "You don't want to do that," she said. "Why not?" Harvey replied. "I thought I could do whatever I wanted." "Well, yes, of course you can," she told him. "But I wouldn't want you to get sick. The fish are poisonous, you see." "Oh," said Harvey. "Well, maybe we won't eat them after all." "Look at this mess," Mrs. Griffin said, fussing over her confusion. "I need a new apron." She hurried away to fetch one, leaving Harvey and Wendell to exchange puzzled looks. "Now I really have to see those fish," Harvey said. As he spoke, the ever-inquisitive Clue Cat jumped upon to the counter beside the stove, and before either of the boys could move to stop him, he had his paws up on the lip of one of the pans. "Hey, get down," Harvey told him. The cat didn't care to take orders. He hoisted himself up onto the rim of the pan to sniff at its contents, his tail flicking back and forth. The next moment, disaster. The tail danced too close to one of the burners and burst into flames. Clue Cat yowled and tipped over the pan he was perched upon. A wave of boiling water washed him off the top of the stove, and he fell to the ground in a smoking heap. Whether drowned, scalded, or incinerated, the end was the same. He hit the floor dead. The din brought Mrs. Griffin hurrying back. "I think I'm going to eat outside," Wendell said as the old woman appeared at the door. He snatched up a couple of hot dogs and was gone. "Oh, my Lord," Mrs. Griffin cried when she set eyes on the dead cat. "Oh, you foolish thing." "It was an accident," Harvey said, sickened by what had happened. "He was up on the stove." Foolish thing, was all Mrs. Griffin seemed to be able to say. She sank down onto her knees and stared at the sad little sack of burned fur. "No more questions from you," she finally murmured. The sight of Mrs. Griffin's unhappiness made Harvey's eyes sting, but he hated to have anyone see him cry. So he fought back his tears as best he could and said, "Shall I help you bury him?" in his gruffest voice. Mrs. Griffin looked around. "That's very sweet of you," she said softly, "but there's no need. You go out and play." "I don't want to leave you here on your own," Harvey said. "Oh, look at you, child," Mrs. Griffin said. "You've got tears on your cheeks." Harvey blushed and wiped them away with the back of his hand. "Don't be ashamed to weep," Mrs. Griffin said. "It's a wonderful thing. I wish I could still shed a tear or two." "You're sad," Harvey said. "I can see that." "What I feel is not quite sadness," Mrs. Griffin replied, "and it's not much solace either, I'm afraid." "What's solace?" Harvey asked. "It's something soothing," Mrs. Griffin said, getting to her feet. "Something that heals the pain in your heart. And you don't have any of that?" "No, I don't," Mrs. Griffin said. She reached out and touched Harvey's cheek. "Except maybe in these tears of yours. They comfort me." She sighed as she traced their tracks with her fingers. "Your tears are sweet, child, and so are you. Now you go out into the light and enjoy yourself. There's sun on the step and it won't be there forever, believe me." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "I'll see you later then," Harvey said and headed out into the afternoon. What a strange book. It's so good though, right? I want to give you guys some good ideas to help you with today's question. Remember, our question today was in chapter 3, and it says, "What does Mrs. Griffin mean when she says the beetle and the worm find their way into everything?" Okay, so this is what we're gonna use to help us, okay? So this is called Ways Readers Learn Hand in Hand with Main Characters, okay? There's that. Can you see it? Okay, and so the first one says main character asking direct questions, okay? So in this case, we have in chapter 4 with Harvey who said, well, actually chapter 4 who said, Harvey continued to wonder and asked Wendell about Luna. Can you guys see that okay? And then the second thing says main character listening to explanations or stories, okay? And if you'll remember, also, well, this was chapter 3. This is having to do with our question today. Check it out, you guys. It says, Harvey listens to Mrs. Griffin talk about the beetle and the worm in chapter 3. The last part that will really be helpful, main characters having new and unfamiliar experiences, right? If you've never done this before, you're gonna learn just right along with your main character, right? This is why you're learning hand in hand with them. And this says, Harvey and Rictus approach the illusion of the wall. It says in chapter 4. I'm not sure if that was in chapter 4 or chapter 2. But they reach the illusion of the wall, right? So with this, you guys are learning just there right along with the main character. All right, off you go. Go to Canvas, answer your quiz question, and please fill in your reading log when you're done reading your own fantasy book. By the way, did you guys notice I have some books lined up back here? This is the one I'm reading right now. I've got 2 books from the Hunger Games, and this last one is The Maze Runner. So I hope you've picked some really good books, and I can't wait to see what y'all are reading, and I can't wait to read your responses in Canvas. I will try to give you guys feedback in the form of a comment back to your response as I'm viewing them, okay? Hope you guys are having a great day, and hopefully I'll see you on Zoom later this morning.